the reason why I said the Pacific, like I was telling Tanner, was I wanted to discuss some misconceptions about Japanese armor doctrine. That was fresh on my mind, but we can go on.
No, yeah, whichever. I'm good for.
Because I know me and Isaac have talked about that before, but...
Have you ever heard the story of my brother killing a deer with a knife?
No.
Please continue.
Jesus. Hey, I actually found out an interesting fact. If the first army in the world to have an airborne division was actually the Red Army.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then followed by the Germans, and then the Brits and Americans.
That was going to be us with the planned 1919 offensive during World War I, but as we know, the war ended in 1918.
Yeah.
But they beat us simply because the war ended. Otherwise, the 1st Infantry Division was going to have the 1st Regiment of Airborne Soldiers. I believe it was the 1st Infantry Division. But I mean, Pershing was planning for airborne operations. Because they were going to have troops riding on wings of like Vickers Vimy bombers and stuff like that. Yeah, just hang on. They were going to fly at like relatively low altitudes, so that way they're not going to fucking freeze to death up there riding on the wings. But they would simply fly at low speeds, low altitudes, and just you'd let go, pull your parachute, and just drift down.
Oh, they had developed parachutes by then. Okay. Mm-hmm. No, I didn't realize that because I know
the first successful operations and stuff like that were done, or even though they were drills, were the Soviets though. They had the first full-fledged airborne units. And the first successful, I believe it was the first successful military application of paratroopers was the Germans during World War II with the invasion of Crete. Then they dropped like some...
Well, they were on gliders.
Yeah. But I mean, then they send in like 6,000 or 7,000 troops and they beat 20,000 British.
Yeah, something like that.
In like a couple weeks.
Well, the problem was with the British tanks on Crete, their shells didn't fit into their tanks. They were too big for the guns. They had ordered the wrong shells.
Mm-hmm. They were ordering them for... I think what it was is they weren't able to get their larger tanks to Crete. Yeah, they weren't able to get their larger tanks, and they ordered the wrong shells for the tanks that they had to bring.
I'm gonna look up just because I want to see what tank models they got. Because I was thinking maybe they accidentally ordered 57 millimeter rounds when they should have been ordering 40 millimeter 2-pounder rounds. Yeah. But they didn't really have any British tanks that were equipped with a 57 millimeter 6-pounder. Yeah. They didn't really. I don't think they really had any that were in service at that point. Because that I think predated the Crusader Mark III.
Because like, I think so. No, I just remember these from like Fag magazine I read a while ago.
I'm not surprised it happened. I mean, maybe it's the British fucking order, but...
Wow. Okay, I was correct. It was 13 days was the battle. That's how quickly it was. Let's see here.
Ooh.
Okay, I was wrong. Germany sent in a lot more troops than I thought. Okay, so they sent in 14,000 paratroopers, 15,000 mountain troopers.
Oh,
holy shit!
Maybe.
And the United Kingdom had 18,000 troops. Greece had between 10 and 11,000. Australia had 6,500. New Zealand had. Okay, so they had.
So they had an Anzac division.
They had a decent amount of troops.
They had 42,000 for the Allied soldiers, and then the Germans had almost 30,000 with 2,700 Italian troops backing them up.
Okay.
So it was still a smaller force, but it's still pretty impressive. 13 days.
When was that?
1941. 20th May. So yeah, so I'm pretty confident that predates the Crusader Mark III.
So the Australians and the New Zealanders, was that an Anzac division, or was that just?
I don't know if they were still actually the Anzac Corps. I don't know if they were still the Anzacs. I'm pretty sure they were.
I thought they had reestablished Anzac Corps for World War II. But...
That could very well be. I'm not 100% sure.
Do I want to?
Yeah.
Like I know they were still using it, but like that heavily.
I mean, if they couldn't get.
Well, the problem was.
Well, if they were on the defense, probably.
Well, that you had to still be able to upgrade. And like you're still developing new tanks, and then you still have to replace your old tanks. And if your older tanks are still fine, effective fighting machines, they're not going to necessarily replace it. I'm sure they saved the newer designs for like Africa, and then in the Pacific too. maybe not necessarily island garrisons. If they had the right shells, those fucking tanks would have changed the course of Creed. At least made it more costly for the Germans. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you wouldn't
No,
want
'cause
to
what was
just
the biggest
throw
shell
away
that they were
tanks.
carrying?
Okay, so
They're gonna
if
use
they
them up.
if they actually had Churchill tanks, so if they had the Churchill Mark III or IV, they would have had the 6-pounder, which might make sense, but I don't know when that was introduced, though, when the Mark III and IV were. Because the Mark I and II, I'm just talking about the Churchill heavy tanks, those did have a 2-pounder on them. Because I'm also thinking, too, not many British tanks have the 47mm, too, because that was, like, the A1E1 Independent. Don't you have the Independent? In War Thunder? Yeah. Yeah, that's got a 47mm. QF 3-pounder, I think. And let's just be honest, the 17-pounder isn't really an anti-infantry weapon, so...
We'll put the 17-pound shell, and we got a couple troops coming.
Use your 30 cals. Don't waste your shells.
I'd rather use 25-pounders, though, instead of infantry.
Oh yeah, honestly, just absolutely, just what happened to him? Well, he was there, and then there was a red mist.
Yeah, exactly.
He was there.
Hit him with a dart. 17-pounder Sabo.
Oh my
Jesus
God.
Christ.
See, there was a hill here, and now there's not a hill here.
Well, have you watched Fury?
Yeah.
Yeah, when they go up
Oh my God,
against that
the-
fucking Tiger tank, and the commander's like, blah, 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 shouting or whatever. He's like, Tiger tank goes off. Boom. Guy's gone.
Mhm.
Fuck that.
I still find, I understand how cool that scene was and stuff like that, but Fury, the M4A3 EZ8, has the long 76 on it, which is designed to pierce the front of a Tiger II from 800 meters.
Yeah.
So honestly, all they had to do was back up to the tree line and put one round right through the upper front plate.
But
You would have killed every single man.
But
in
it
the
doesn't
tank.
make for a good
No,
movie,
no,
so-
and that's why I was
yeah.
like, I understand.
It doesn't angled in that scene either. I don't think they would.
The Tiger? No,
I
no,
think they
it
were
was
just
it
flat
was
on.
it was
Yeah.
facing them
Makes
flat
no
on.
sense.
That's the.
Jesus, I hated that movie. If I'd have
Don't
watched
get me
another
wrong,
minute
there
of
were
Shia
fucking
LaBeouf going,
flaws.
I would have. Jesus, I almost couldn't finish. Jeez.
What are your thoughts, Thor? I already told you 3 times. I'm not going to change my opinion in the last 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, and then fucking Brad Pitt. Jesus Christ, God, he's annoying.
I still love it though. Who do I shoot at? The Nazis, dumb fuck. With the
Preferring Glorious Bastards.
and that
Glorious
was even
Bastards.
worse.
That was great.
That was even-
Well, that was
hilarious.
meant to be kind of
Yeah.
a cheesy movie.
No, I
That was
know, but I
hilarious.
just.
That was
I still have bitter
cheesy.
feelings about that movie because I felt it was misrepresented in the trailers. Because we thought, me, my father, my brother, we thought it was all going to be about the bastards and not this shadow plot with the French resistance and stuff. We thought it was just going to be them, so I still hate that movie for the misrepresentation.
Oh yeah.
See, I hated that movie for a long time because I thought it was just awfully directed until I learned that it was directed by Quentin Tarantino. I'm like, oh,
That makes sense.
I get it now. That's funny. Yeah, I had
Man
no
with
idea
too much
until
time on his hands.
5 years later.
Have you guys watched The Hateful Eight?
Yes.
Oh
Holy
god, that's so
fuck.
bad.
That's Quentin Tarantino. Right?
I hate. Yeah, it
It's
was.
so slow for the longest
it's
time,
it's
and then
meant
it's
to be
just
like,
like-
and then all of them
No,
would
no,
get
but
fucking
here's the
blown
thing:
away
it
and
wasn't
shit.
even like a good bad. It was just awful. Like I
Really?
would I really hated that.
I mean, for me, it was a
Bad
good
movie.
bad. You know?
so
It reminded me of
right?
whatever it was. It was the Ridiculous
The Mountain
Six.
Jaegers.
Oh
Oh.
god, The Ridiculous Six. That was kind of cheesy. But...
That was.
No,
Yeah,
you
the
guys
problem
gotta
with
watch
Magnificent
Samurai
Seven.
7.
The problem
Oh,
with
yeah.
Hateful Eight is it's the exact same cast as
I know.
Django.
Oh yeah. Oh my god. that was a
Django
bad
was
movie.
Django was.
Django's one of my favorite movies
That
of
was
all time.
hilarious.
That
I
was
love
like
that
a
movie.
Good bad movie too.
That was great. I couldn't resist. It's like down here we should. That deal's
What-
not done. I love that. It's like I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
Actually, now I just like thinking of that movie. I want to make a rig with a Derringer like that. Just. Well, there was another movie with a guy had a. What was it? He had a macro. Yeah.
Then it was a Type 25.
Okay, I thought it was a macro.
So what? So should we get started with the
I'm
the
going to
discussion
talk
now?
about whatever you guys want.
He's been recording for the past 13 minutes since we've been talking. So.
Okay.
You seem to have something on your mind, Jonah.
Yeah.
Release it.
So anyway, so I was wondering. So When you guys think of like Japanese tanks, that's why I was thinking about the Pacific Theater and stuff like that.
Thank you.
What comes to mind? Because I wanted to discuss some of the
Oversized prototypes of really shitty built tanks. So.
What are you talking about? Japanese what?
Japanese tanks, Japanese armors. That was one of the things that I wanted to discuss about the Pacific Theater was misconceptions about Japanese armor doctrine.
See, the only thing I know about Japanese armor doctrine is they would use tanks more as fortified bunkers on islands when Allied troops would navally invade them. Other than limited counterattacks on some of the larger islands, as far as I know, that's all they were really used for.
I feel like, if anything, I'm thinking mobile bunker, kind of like what he said.
Yeah, infantry support.
So
yeah, well, I mean, like
rather than saying what's
because
wrong
I'm also including the Manchuria campagn and the battles of Cult and Gold and stuff like that. That's why I said Pacific, Asia.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I guess I should have specified it a little bit more.
So what do people think of it now?
Because
Like,
a lot of
what's the
people
stereotype?
equivalent Japanese tanks to really shit brawlers and not good against tank or other tanks. And I mean, they'd be right, but that's because Japanese tanks, like for example, the Type 95 Hago and the Type 97,
yeah,
the Type 89 Igoko, with the short 57, those were basically just meant to be infantry support. I mean, the Type 95 was meant to be tank on tank because it had the higher velocity 37 millimeter, but Type 89 is infantry support, low velocity 57. That I think I remember reading on a paper. It has like 20 millimeters of armor penetration with a high explosive shell or armor piercing shell, which is garbage. It's fucking awful. That's worse than the French tanks at the beginning of the war, or the French 37.
Well, I think if you actually were in the tank and looked at it, and be like, yeah, this would be nice for 10 years before.
That's the thing, because those were made back in I want to say it was 1933 or 34 was when they were actually being introduced or being produced, the Type 95 and the Type 89.
Type 97 was 1930s.
Is that the Chiha? Type 97 Chiha medium was considered average production.
Yeah.
Okay, because
they had the 25 millimeter armor on each side with the 30 in the front.
Yeah.
But then for some reason, no armor in the back.
Yeah.
For the first production models, anyways, which made
you're never supposed to surrender. I guess it's Japanese.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was when they actually started figuring out how to make a halfway decent tank. Granted, it saw most of its combat 10 years after it was supposed to, mainly because by the time that they were actually fighting other tanks, China had I think it was 20 tanks between them, and most of them were armed with machine guns, so they didn't have to be. They were Vickers 6 tons.
Most of them were light panzers on loan from Germany, actually.
No, they were Vickers 6 tons. Germany didn't really touch China. You're thinking of the Spanish Civil War.
Oh, shit.
The only country to touch China was Japan.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how old. Depends on how old you want to go
touch.
back. There's Mongolia, and
But anyway, what I was going to say though is just because they didn't start seeing their actual bread and butter tank combat until the Pacific campaign. By then they were woefully inadequate, and that's why they started retrofitting a lot of the Chihas to be Chiha Kai standard, where they had the long 47, which wasn't reliable enough against the front of the Shermans, but it could easily deal with them from the sides and the rear, because it was actually a pretty phenomenal anti-tank gun, and I think that even became their standard towed anti-tank gun for a while until they started coming up with the idea of taking some of their high-velocity anti-aircraft guns and turning them towards the ground. Because, for example, there's the Chi To, which was a proposed prototype, or no, that actually had a limited production run. Because the Chi Ri was proposed. The Chi To, or the Type 4 Chi To, had a Type 4 75 millimeter high velocity that could go through the front of a Sherman at almost 1,000 meters.
Jesus.
Actually, no, I think it was longer.
Wait, the Shermans.
Didn't that have at 2 kilometers? Doesn't that have almost 101 millimeters of cannon with its standard shell anyway?
How much armor was in front of the Shermans?
The Shermans, they only had 50 millimeters sloped at 60 degrees. Granted, it was sloped, but I mean, at 2 kilometers, that ricochet is going to come into play. But at 1 kilometer, I guarantee you, it's going to go through just about every time.
Yeah.
Especially if you happen to have a fucking ace sniper, and you can go for either the front of the turret or the machine gun port, because I mean, as we know, Sherman's never got rid of the whole machine gunner. So I mean,
And that was just the prototype one or the limited production.
the Cheeto.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, fortunately for us.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for the Japanese, their two best tanks that were going to be produced during the war only had limited production, and they were withheld from seeing combat because they were holding them in reserve in case the home islands were invaded. They weren't on Okinawa, but they were on mainland Japan.
Yeah, it's a shame they spread out, pissed everyone off, and cut their oil off. They kind of screwed themselves up.
They cut us off from most of the natural rubber in the world. We had to come up with synthesized rubber.
Yeah. Which, is that a bad thing?
I mean, it helped us do that, but I mean, that was one of the things that they were. That's why they went out into, the Pacific, was they were hoping to use natural rubber production as a bargaining chip to help levy, maybe back off on the embargo a bit, because in like 1937 or something like that, only 5% of rubber production was synthesized. Most of it was using rubber plants, and in the Pacific Islands, I think the Marshall Islands or the Marianas Islands had like 70% of the world's rubber production there. And by 1945, I think it had completely flipped. It was 90% synthesized because we realized we didn't need to.
Yeah. The one bargaining chip they had.
We outgrew
silicone.
Yeah. But I mean, that was part of their strategy, though, was to try and use that to levy negotiations.
That didn't work too well. That didn't work too well for them.
When they started, okay, so we're going to take all this stuff. Oh shit, they declared war on us.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? No.
Okay, sorry, I just realized we're getting off topic, the Japanese armor doctrine. I just wanted to explain, no, because also, too, a lot of people don't realize what really constituted a lot of the design choices back in the old times. Granted, yes, the tanks were outdated, but also, too, they weren't really being used for their express purpose. A lot of those tanks were meant to be close in infantry support, and granted, yes, they did do that as mobile fortifications or the hit or miss counterattacks that we saw very sparsely in the Pacific campaign. But you also got to realize too that the basis of the Japanese armor design is home defense first, and so the reason why Japanese tanks were so thin and so narrow and typically short was because they had to fit on rail cars. They have to fit on rail cars that can go through mountain tunnels.
Oh, got it.
Also, armor wasn't a really huge concern back then. Back when they were designed, the 37, kind of like the U.S., Germany, and Britain. I mean, Britain had the 40 millimeter. But for anti-armor concerns, those were doing the jobs just fine. But then it was right around in the late 30s, was when everybody started up-armoring because they were like,
because they started using what was it, reverse. It was the reversible. I can't remember what they're called. Reverse K bullets or whatever.
That was World War One. The Germans had the K bullets, which were just solid steel bullets.
Yeah.
And the British had the reverse Lee Enfield rounds, the reverse bullets.
No, what were you going to say?
It was like
for our first armor production.
World War One really showed what tanks could do and why they were so important. But Japan probably missed out on a lot of that.
Yeah, because they were busy keeping the Germans occupied in the Pacific while dealing with their colonies.
They didn't know how important this was going to be, and maybe the tank-on-tank action wasn't.
Well, I don't think they really ever saw tank-on-tank action.
They caught on too late. They showed up at the starting line too late, and by the time they were catching up, because like I said, the Type 4 Cheeto, and my personal favorite of the Japanese wartime design, the Type 3 Chi-Nu, both were fantastic. The Chi-Nu was actually on performance with some of the mid-model Panzer IVs, like the Panzer IV F2 and the Panzer IV H. Granted, it didn't have spaced armor, but it had a gun that was actually better than the Panzer IV's mid-size 75, and it had armor thickness comparable. And it had an angled turret. It was like a hexagon shape. But the Type 4 Cheeto actually had a rounded turret. But I mean, that long 75, that Type 4 75 was just a fucking sniper rifle. But yeah, but again, too late to make a difference. Mm-hmm. Also, too, fun fact: the only two Japanese heavy tanks that I know of, one was the Rogo, and that was just a failure. That tank was kind of garbage, and the OI which a lot of people know thanks to World of Tanks, the Japanese super heavy
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
That's only speculated to have been partially complete.
Yeah, most of them are paper tanks.
Paper
to be
tanks, like the
honest.
Type 4, the Type 5. Paper. Absolutely. How the fuck can you get a 150-ton tank
Well,
off of a Japanese island?
most of them are meant to be used as coastal defense
Coastal
anyway.
defense.
The mobile bunker, that's
Yeah.
where I got
Yeah,
that
but
idea
mobile
from.
bunker on like hard ground, not coastal ground. You get that in the sand, you're not
It's
going
basically,
anywhere.
you might as well just bury it yourself at that point. But
Well,
I mean, that's kind of like the whole point, or that was the idea behind the mouse and stuff like that, was to be a mobile steel bunker. But the only problem is, though, is that you can't put it on soft terrain. It has to be, it's limited to concrete at that point. And in order to defeat that, or to prevent it from reaching your positions, you just gotta send some fighter bombers and just drop some bombs on some
Well,
roads,
that
and
or
there
knock
you
out
go.
its supporting fuel supply because
Or how about,
They
you know
could
what,
only get, like,
let's cut out the middleman. Let's just bomb the thing itself. It's a giant target. It's kind of hard to miss. As long as you're not using a heavy bomber, like at a strategic bombing altitude. If you use a fighter bomber, like a Typhoon or P-47,
and it's not like
done.
you're gonna even if you miss and hit next to it, it's gonna kill everything next to it. It's gonna blow up the side, wreck the track.
fucking do what they did in Saving Private Ryan. Run up, do TNT to the tracks, run away. You're done.
I was going to say, even if you don't hit it directly, you can still track the thing. Or as what some of the Russians were discovering when they were using the KV-2s or the Su-152s or the ISU-152s when dealing with Tigers, was if you use the high explosive, the HE rounds, you didn't even have to pen tanks. You didn't have to penetrate tanks because the explosive shockwave would basically take the crew on the inside, shake them up, and just kill them. The explosive shockwave would
Oh,
Well,
the
it's
concussion
it's
wave,
kind of yeah. Well, it's kind of like
Hey,
being
that's
underwater.
true, so-
If you chuck a grenade on land versus you chuck a grenade in the water, you jump in the water, you're dead.
Mhm.
Yep.
But what I was going to say, though, is there were actually reports of there was a couple of reports where the explosive shockwave from the from the 152 millimeter high explosive round ripping Tiger turrets clean off,
Jesus.
just with explosive force alone.
I mean, great. You might have the tank itself is already extremely heavy, and then you got to think about it. Great, there's only this much space in between the top of the turret and the bottom of the tank. But really, what's holding it? I mean,
It's just its weight, honestly.
you get enough force to blow off the top of the tank, and you're perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let alone killing the crew inside.
Oh yeah, just cavitate their lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, like you were saying, is the fuel supply.
Oh,
You know,
God.
back yesterday you were talking about like that 50-mile or whatever Russian line.
Oh yeah, the defensive depth at Kirk.
German
Kursk.
tanks couldn't even get through that on one tank of fuel. You know, so like you wouldn't even get halfway across before you needed fuel anyway.
I think Panzer IVs might be able to, but anything heavier than that, I'm pretty sure. Actually, Panzer IIIs and IVs probably could, but anything else. Yeah.
Well, it's a big problem, especially with larger.
But that's
tanks,
not
be it
accounting
German
for
or
the
anybody.
combat that
It's-
they're already going through. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, you can't fuel up in a complete combat zone in fortifications.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Hey, I'm on a
they
gas.
just don't. The Germans, or I would think most armies, would never have enough resources to be able to exploit that breakthrough substantially.
Having a fuel truck behind the tank.
Have you seen
They tried
videos of
that.
them doing
That's
that?
like a giant. It's like a giant bomb following you everywhere you go.
Well,
Doing
the
what?
thing is,
With them doing that, pulling a big tanker behind the tank.
yeah, no, they or like the mono wheel trailer or the monopod trailer and stuff like that too, which is a horrible idea. But
Have you seen the video that I think it was P-51 that was doing strafing runs on a column of tanks with the trailers behind them,
Mhm.
and you just see those trailers go up.
mhm.
It's freaking
But what a lot
cool.
of people realize though is that that's a lot of times those those trailers aren't actually pre-hooked up to the fuel system, so it's just a fire on the outside of the tank, and that's not really going to do much.
Yeah. You
Kind
just
of like-
lose your fuel.
It's kind of why a lot of people always assume that the Russians had a really terrible idea with like their IS tanks and their T-34 tanks with those external fuel tanks. Those aren't hooked into the fuel system. You actually have to manually siphon the gas out of those tanks into the fuel tanks. So if those go up, it's just on the side of the tank. And typically they just
Hey, you want to pass me the?
typically they drop those before they went into combat.
You know?
Yeah.
It just means you look awesome when you return fire on people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just flame flying
The
out of it.
flaming tank just rolling over there.
See, and that's why Barbarossa really had to be just like the fucking Blitzkrieg through France, you know? But the problem was, even if they would have taken Moscow, Joseph Stalin would have still escaped, and as long as he lives, the Russian army is going to keep fighting, so...
Mm-hmm.
Well, they would just do what they did to Napoleon. They'd probably just burn Moscow before they even got there.
That too.
Mm-hmm. And even if he fell, you still got like Khrushchev and Zhukov and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of Russia to fall back into.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there's not enough of them.
Japan should have gone to fucking Manchuria into Siberia, while Germany took Russia from the other end.
You say that, but the thing is, though, is that the Japanese, like I said, the Japanese army got their asses stomped by the Soviets in 1937 in Khalkhin Gol. That was why the Japanese Navy got so much more funding than the Japanese army at that point, because the Japanese army was disgraced by the Soviets.
Oh, shit.
And the Soviets didn't even have T-34s or ISs, or they didn't even have KV-1s at Khalkhin Gol. They used BT-5s and T-26s,
Really?
and they stomped the Japanese. They didn't even have any of their top-of-the-line tech. So, I'm sorry to put a hole in that theory. They would not have advanced very far. Because if there's anybody that's just as fanatic, if not more so, at defending territory than the Japanese, I mean, you can throw a fucking slave army of the Soviets at them.
It's a fucking Red Army now.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying, they already fought and lost badly to the Soviets, and that was when the Soviets weren't even at their top game.
Do you suppose that was the reason they signed a sort of non-aggression pact with them during World War II?
Please don't hurt us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until, like, Germany fell, and then Soviet armies, like, we're gonna curb stop you. Took all of Manchuria in a fucking week.
Pretty much, yeah. That was one of the reasons why we dropped the atomic bomb, was because we wanted to keep the Soviets out of the Pacific.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and that's part of the reason Japan surrendered, is they took Manchuria and they're like, okay, we're gonna give up to the Americans. Fuck it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, after we dropped the second atomic bomb.
Yeah, they came to us for help.
Yeah.
They were so scared.
Do you guys really think the Soviets could have made it across, though?
No.
Across what?
What part of the Pacific is that? Across to the Japanese homelands.
I think that all the.
I mean, they didn't have that effective of a navy.
They didn't have battleships or carriers, but they had a bunch of destroyers and a shitload of boats, like river boats and stuff like that. I mean, it would be rough waters, but I mean, they care little enough about the individual soldiers that I'm sure they wouldn't mind losing a few armored river boats in the high seas in order to get them across the channel.
Jesus, a land invasion of Japan? Oh my god.
Yeah,
The Soviets lost a lot of people. I can't imagine how many people the Japanese would have lost.
is it Operation Olympic? The drawn-up plans for the Allied invasion of homeland Japan?
I would have to look into that again. I don't remember.
I don't remember what it was, but I remember watching this.
I think it
was
might be Marshall.
Yeah. It was set for November
One of
1945,
those have pickle juice on
and
it.
they took the casualty figures
so
from
you
Iwo
have
Jima and
pickles
Okinawa, and they blew it up for, like, the population difference.
All right,
They figured 11 million Japanese people would have died, another million Allied soldiers, and would have drugged the war on for another 3 years.
Yeah, if you
We were
think D-Day
nice
was
enough
bad,
to drop notes.
fuck that. D-Day would have been a walk in the park compared to that. Oh my god.
J-Day.
It was supposed to be like 3 or 4 times the size of D-Day just for the southernmost island.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
Just for one island.
Yeah.
Not even the main.
And then they bitch about, oh, we shouldn't have dropped the atomic bomb. It was so bad.
It's
Bitch,
like
that
12
saved
million
lives.
people would have died.
Yeah.
if
Yeah,
we
it's
did.
sad to say that 100,000 people was less than 12 million.
Yeah.
I
That would
also
have been
think
the
that's actually.
suppressing fire.
I also think that's actually lowballing the casualties. I'd say give or take 3 million more.
Well, 'cause
I should send you a
person
link
on
to that
the
video.
island
It was
fallen.
interesting as well. And I think it was actually Military History Visualized who did that.
Hmm.
Okay, so what do you guys think would have happened if Belgium would have extended the Maginot all the way to the Atlantic if they were like they were supposed to?
Mm.
Because a lot of people don't realize that the Maginot Line was incredibly effective when it was actually being taken on frontally, like how it was supposed to happen. The Maginot held up very well. It's true.
It just.
When you couldn't skirt the thing, you had to go through.
Or I was watching a documentary on YouTube, and it was saying Belgium was supposed to extend the Maginot, because they had agreed with the French to pay for the other half of it to extend all the way to the Atlantic. They never did it.
I'm gonna steal one.
It just, you think about it, like if they would have had a Maginot at least as strong as the one they had in the Ardennes, Germans would have turned into World War One.
Oh.
I'm sure they would have gotten through with it, but
Because
by that time, the
they were
French and the
developing
British.
weapons specifically to crack it.
Yeah, well, the tanks and the air,
Yeah, but by
air
then the
troopers
British
and
and the
stuff.
Like the
French would
100.
have.
Thank you.
The British and the
Later.
French would have been able to fortify the fuck out of the entire part of northern France by the time the Germans broke through the Maginot.
Well, we would hope.
You'd think they would be able to just fly over it, though. Fly around. Even if it went all the way to the ocean. They could have went out 20 miles out of view. And
You would have had the British and French navies then. Because then France wouldn't have surrendered, and the French navy would have still been in action. And for as good as the Kriegsmarine was in World War II, the British and French combined navies.
I wonder what that would have done to the Eastern Front.
If there would have been a stalemate.
If there was
in
a
France.
stalemate in France, I wonder if that would have been more pressure
Well,
on
do you-
Russia? Or
Well, do you
less?
think he would have attacked Russia?
I mean, also,
Oh, yeah. I think I was a fucking psychopath. He had his eyes
No,
set
no,
there
no, no,
forever,
no.
though.
Would he have waited to try and defeat France first
Oh.
before going to Russia?
the thing is, though, the reason why they attacked in 1941, though, is because every single one of Hitler's advisors was like, yo, if we're going to attack, we should do it now because they're still recovering from the Winter War.
Yeah.
And they're switching over, so we can catch them.
Well, they're
We
mobile.
can literally, I was going to say, we can literally catch them with their pants down at this point, which they did.
Russia.
They did. Yes, Russia. So, I mean, if you look at like the historical context and stuff, it does actually make sense that that's when he attacked. I still don't think he should have, but you got to realize Hitler and Stalin's goals were always opposed. So, I mean, it was only a matter of time before they would go head to head. It's just for Hitler, it was unfortunate timing.
Well, Russia joined before we did. Or was it after?
No. Russia was in the war before we were. Right?
Yeah, that's what I was
By
thinking.
like a couple of months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by a couple months.
Because they
'Cause it was
joined the
1941.
war, and then of course he joined the war.
Wait, no, was it 1940 or 1941? It was Barbarossa.
1941,
That's what I thought.
Because we joined the war in
December.
In December
Yeah,
1941.
last
December
month, and I
1941.
think it was like late summer of 1941 that
Because
Germany did
Pearl Harbor
Barbarossa.
was how many months prior?
No,
December.
it was December 7th.
December 7th. Oh wow, yeah. So we joined the war like
Barbarossa
right
was
after
Barbarossa was
5
like,
months before that.
was like April or May. It was the spring.
Yeah.
It was just at the end of spring.
Oh, that's right. It was supposed to be a brief summer offensive.
Mhm.
that. But I mean,
Like before General Winter came back.
not to be like a
Like,
Nazi
well, that's-
supporter here, but I mean, props to Germany for taking on French army. United Kingdom, United
The
States.
fucking allies in the
But-
Comintern.
They spread themselves thin, though. And as soon as there was real opposition,
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had to
it
dig in.
imploded on itself really fast.
Yeah, they got too big for their britches.
Yeah.
Also, kind of helped that we just bombed the shit out of them. You
Yeah.
know?
Fire bombs usually work pretty well.
Also, like bomb
Honestly-
the factories so they don't have any bullets to shoot.
Honestly,
at
you
us.
know what they really should have? Before taking on Russia, you know what they really should have? They should have doubled down in North Africa so they could get their hands on those oil fields.
Yeah.
Secure a fuel source to help fuel the
The tanks that
offensive-
only can go.
Africa
the-
would have been so much
fuel
easier
the
to take
offensive
than
in
the
Russia.
Caucasus.
Because I mean, when they were taking Russia, they wanted to push out far enough. Because like the long-term plan was to, turn that farmland into German farmland in Western Russia, but also too they were shooting for the Caucasus oil fields as well.
Africa would have been easier to take than the Caucasus.
And that's what I'm saying. Secure the African oil fields. Once you have Africa consolidated, or at least your territory is secure enough to where you don't have to really worry so much, then turn your eyes towards the Soviets. Sure, they might be better equipped, but you still have the resource to maintain a longer offensive now.
Yeah. But that would have expanded your front. Would have been huge.
No, I
to-
understand because it's
turn
one
it
thing to
fed.
take territory, it's another to hold it.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, at least, just even if it's temporary, just try to squeeze as much as you can out of those oil fields.
Yeah. And then if Germany fortified at Italy instead of the Italians, maybe.
Mhm.
I think we can just all agree that world domination is a dumb word.
Yeah, exactly.
Was it
Especially
what?
in Europe. What a stupid place to try to take over.
Yeah, I know, right?
Just the geography
Tell
of
that
it is
the
awful.
Merkel.
Yeah.
Tell that the Merkel.
Oh god, fuck that. Oh shit, we were talking about that last night. The fucking centrist army.
Mm-hmm. What a joke. Oh yeah, okay. So I was reading into it as well while we're talking about the Eastern Front, because you guys are well aware of how like at Stalingrad, how the Sixth Army was trapped by the Soviets because the Soviets managed to surround the city and basically trap the Germans in and stuff like that.
The Soviets in the center of the city, surrounded by the Germans, surrounded by the Soviets.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But because the Italians and Romanians on the Germans' flank collapsed.
Well, they didn't have any fucking AT guns, so
No, they were not very well equipped for.
they fought
dealing
like
with the-
hell.
I'm just saying they weren't
didn't
very
have the
well.
fucking tools.
Yeah, no. But what I was going to say though is because a lot of people always blame Hitler for the disastrous defeat of the Sixth Army as well. Because I mean, obviously the guy didn't want to defy Hitler's orders for holding the city. That's why one of the reasons why he didn't attempt to break up. But otherwise, they were exhausted when I can't remember what army, but there was a relief army sent in to try and help them break out. But the guy didn't want to move. Because he
Wasn't
would've
that the 7th?
I think. I don't remember, but I just know that it was the 6th in the city. Because also too, Hitler was like, "Yo, I can send, or like the Luftwaffe can drop off supplies to you guys, so that way you guys can last out the winter." A lot of the guys, there were there were a couple of guys that were pretty high up in the Luftwaffe that had assured Hitler that yes, they could. So it originally wasn't Hitler's decision. He was the one who was convinced to tell that order. In fact, it actually wasn't even Goering who told Hitler. Goering had the idea, and then his aide, I think, went and just told Hitler, "Yo, we can do this." And then Hitler was like, "I like that idea. Let's do it." Lost, what was it, 500,000 men because of that decision?
You hear about like different power struggles between the Nazis, the Nazi Party, and then the armies and stuff. Like
The fucking
Shit like the SA and the SS.
yeah. Well, one thing that came to my mind was like the army was trying to commission military small arms, the MP40 and the SG-44, and then Hitler wanted his own weapons, and they were both funding the projects at the same exact time.
Mm-hmm.
And the MP40 came through with like a month to spare ahead of Hitler's shitty design.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just like almost everybody in the Wehrmacht, the actual like German army, hated the fucking Nazi Party, but they had to put up with them because it was the Nazi Party in power.
Yeah, they were in power, and much to their begrudging opinions, he had taken their economy out of the shitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how long do you think that would have taken for the Nazi Party to get overthrown? Like, let's say America didn't get into anything, and Japan's, behaved themselves, and Germany took over.
It's like a stalemate.
Yeah, well, like Germany just took Europe.
See, I feel like they would have just tried to kill anybody and anything that would have said anything.
I feel like there would have been
mentioned
a
it,
coup
and it just would have been
eventually.
dead.
That's
feel
what
I mean,
they
look
were
at Operation Valkyrie.
Yeah,
That wasn't
Operation
a total
Valkyrie.
plot.
Exactly. That didn't take,
And guess what?
Much.
Guess what Hitler does as a result of Operation Valkyrie? He has arguably his best field commander commit suicide because of it.
Fucking Rommel, right?
Yeah, Rommel.
Yeah.
And because Rommel wasn't part of it, but he knew of it, and to Hitler that was complacent, or that was
Complacent
being,
treatment,
being,
yeah.
being complicit. Being complicit. The fact that he didn't try to stop it.
Well,
Yeah, I don't blame Hitler.
the
for
SA
one
and
for
the
that.
SS
No, I know,
never
but
got
at the
because
same time, I would have had a
Hitler
state
had all of his
execution. I would've
SS
been like,
members
win the
go
war,
and shoot
and
all
then
of
I'll
his
give you a
SA
state
members.
funeral.
It's like, you guys aren't useful anymore, and he just commands them to all go shoot them.
I just find it funny too that the other guy who would have been really good at his job in the Western European theater, like with the invasion of France and stuff like that, Guderian. Every time Rommel, I think he only did it a couple times, but every time Rommel tried to have him replace him, because Rommel wasn't he like sick and stuff like that at that time too?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was recovering from
Yeah.
injuries or something like that. But he kept saying, "Yo, Guderian is the only guy that I really trust to take over my stead. Will you guys please appoint him?" Denied every time because Guderian apparently was a hard man to work with because he didn't like incompetency. which plagued a lot of the German higher-ups. So he wasn't a very
No.
he was a popular commander with his men because he was harsh but fair. But
Nothing says trying to compensate for something than taking over the world.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
No, but the problem was most of them were Nazi political officers because they were trying to get rid of the old Wehrmacht generals. Not necessarily through, like, killing
also, a lot of
them,
those
but,
guys were
like,
Prussian aristocracy. They were born into their positions, and I think Guderian. But I mean, Guderian, if I remember correctly, was a middle-class Prussian,
Right?
but not an upper class. So he was kind of a made man, but also he was a little privileged at birth, but not to the point of being aristocracy or something
Marshall,
like that. They
just
still
put
held
your
that against him
straw
because he
in there.
was Russian or
no,
Prussian
I'm gonna put a
aristocracy.
straw.
Which I don't know why they fell in love with Rommel. I mean, yeah, he was considered a national hero and stuff because they needed a poster boy, but Rommel was a self-made man. He started from the bottom. You know that, right? He started as a corporal in the infantry.
Okay, please don't play that super loud. So.
I feel like somebody was about to like trip in the.
They're not supposed to start until 9. it says.
Hey, cool, we got copyright music.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, no, the problem is we won't be able to hear each other
See,
talking. If
yeah,
we're
This is
playing
why you
that
should
loud,
brought the GoPro because the GoPro cuts out all background noise and only focuses on voice.
so would have focused on this, I think.
Jeez, we have 45 minutes.
No, I know, right? Well, we.
I looked at the schedule and I'm like, oh, they wouldn't have anything on a Wednesday, and it's like, no, the 21st, the M80s.
I'll just challenge one of them to a game of stretch and accidentally hit their foot.
Throw a punch.
Oh God, no! I don't.
Well, we can go somewhere else too, I guess.
Just scream Suka Ibani at them.
Just as soon as I start seeing signs.
Well, I think we should probably just pull it now.
Yeah, might as well.